It was a sunny Tuesday afternoon in the bustling city of Riverdale when Michael, a former U.S. Marine Corps sergeant, set out to run his weekly errands. As he climbed into his weathered but well-maintained pickup truck, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride as he glanced at the military service decals adorning the rear window. For Michael, those decals were more than just decorations. They were a symbol of the sacrifices he had made in service to his country. He had proudly worn the Marine Corps uniform for 8 years, serving 2 tours overseas and earning several commendations for his bravery and leadership. Now, as a civilian, he carried that sense of duty and honor with him every day. As Michael navigated the busy streets, he couldn't help but notice the envious glances from other drivers whenever they caught sight of his truck. Some would nod approvingly, while others seemed to scoff at the unabashed display of patriotism. But Michael paid them no mind. He was proud of his service and had no intention of hiding it. After stopping by the grocery store to pick up a few essentials, Michael headed to the local hardware store to gather supplies for a small home repair project he had been meaning to tackle. As he pulled into the crowded parking lot and scanned the rows of vehicles, he finally found an open spot near the entrance and carefully maneuvered his truck into the space. Grabbing his shopping bags, Michael stepped out of the truck and made his way towards the store's entrance. It was then that he noticed a group of young adults, all dressed in matching designer clothing, gathered near the back of the parking lot. They seemed to be engrossed in some sort of heated discussion, their voices carrying across the asphalt. Shrugging it off, Michael continued on his way, focused solely on the task at hand. However, as he emerged from the store a short while later, his steps suddenly faltered and his heart sank. There, emblazoned across the once pristine paint of his truck, were a series of crude and offensive graffiti markings. Michael's breath caught in his throat as he took in the sight, his mind racing with a mixture of emotions. Anger, disbelief, and a deep sense of violation all bubbled to the surface as he approached the vandalized vehicle, his hands trembling with a barely contained fury. Without hesitation, Michael quickly snapped a few photographs of the damage, ensuring that he had ample evidence to present to the authorities. As he surveyed the extent of the destruction, his eyes landed on the military service decals, now defaced with hateful slurs and obscenities. It was as if the perpetrators had deliberately targeted the symbols of his patriotism and service. For a moment, Michael felt the weight of his years in the Marines crashing down on him. He had endured countless hardships and challenges during his time in uniform, but this act of wanton disrespect cut him to the core. How dare someone desecrate the very emblem of the organization he had proudly served? Steeling his resolve, Michael took a deep breath and quickly dialed the local police department, his voice calm but laced with a barely contained fury as he reported the incident. The dispatcher assured him that an officer would be dispatched to the scene immediately, and Michael waited anxiously, pacing back and forth beside his vandalized truck. As the minutes ticked by, Michael replayed the events in his mind, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had he somehow provoked this attack? Had he done something to warrant such a malicious response? The questions swirled in his mind, and he found himself questioning his own actions, even though he knew he had done nothing wrong. Finally, the distinct sound of a siren cut through the air, and Michael watched as a police cruiser pulled into the parking lot, its lights flashing. A uniformed officer emerged from the vehicle and approached Michael, notepad in hand, ready to document the incident. "Sir, I'm Officer Williams. Can you tell me exactly what happened here?" the officer asked, his tone professional and sympathetic. Michael took a deep breath and recounted the events, describing in detail the offensive graffiti that now marred the surface of his beloved truck. As he spoke, the officer listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes in his pad. "This is a clear case of vandalism and destruction of property," the officer said, his brow furrowed with concern. "We'll do everything we can to track down the culprits and ensure they're held accountable for their actions." Michael nodded, feeling a small sense of relief that the authorities were taking the matter seriously. However, as the officer turned to inspect the damage more closely, Michael couldn't help but wonder what the future held. Would the perpetrators ever be found? And even if they were, would true justice ever be served? With a heavy heart, Michael climbed back into his truck, his eyes lingering on the defaced decals that had once been a source of pride. As he started the engine and began the familiar drive home, he silently vowed to do whatever it took to ensure that the disrespect shown to his service and sacrifice would not go unanswered. As Michael pulled into the driveway of his modest two-story home, the weight of the day's events seemed to settle heavily on his shoulders. He had spent the drive home replaying the incident in his mind, trying to make sense of the senseless act of vandalism. Stepping out of his truck, Michael gazed up at the American flag that fluttered proudly from the flagpole in his front yard, a constant reminder of the principles he had sworn to uphold during his time in the Marine Corps. He had fought for that flag, for the freedoms it represented, and the thought of someone defacing the symbols of his service filled him with a deep sense of outrage. With a heavy sigh, Michael made his way to the front door, his mind racing with 1,000 different thoughts. Should he report the incident to his homeowners association? Would they be able to do anything to address the situation? Or should he simply take matters into his own hands and attempt to remove the offensive graffiti himself? As he stepped inside, Michael was greeted by the warm, familiar scent of his wife, Sarah's, homemade marinara sauce simmering on the stove. She had been preparing his favorite meal, unaware of the ordeal he had just endured. "Honey, you're home," Sarah exclaimed, a bright smile spreading across her face as she turned to greet him. But the smile quickly faded as she noticed the troubled expression on Michael's face. "What's wrong? You look upset." Michael hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to break the news to his wife. He knew that she would be just as outraged as he was, and he didn't want to worry her unnecessarily. But ultimately, he decided that honesty was the best policy. "Something happened at the hardware store," he began, his voice laced with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "My truck. It's been vandalized." Sarah's eyes widened, and she immediately rushed to his side, placing a comforting hand on his arm. "What do you mean? What happened?" she asked, her tone tinged with concern. Michael proceeded to describe the incident in detail, recounting the offensive graffiti that had been scrawled across the rear of his truck, targeting the very symbols of his military service. As he spoke, Sarah's expression morphed from one of concern to one of pure outrage. "How dare they?" she exclaimed, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. "After all you've done for this country, how could someone do this to you?" Michael nodded, feeling a sense of relief that his wife understood the gravity of the situation. "I've already reported it to the police, but I'm not sure what they'll be able to do," he admitted, his brow furrowing with worry. "I just don't understand why someone would target me like this." Sarah wrapped her arms around her husband, pulling him into a tight embrace. "It's going to be okay, Michael," she whispered, her voice soft and reassuring. "We'll get through this together, just like we've gotten through everything else." As they stood there, holding each other tightly, Michael felt a glimmer of hope begin to take root in his heart. With Sarah by his side, he knew that he could weather any storm, no matter how daunting it might seem. Pulling back, Sarah looked up at him with a determined expression. "So, what's our next move?" she asked, her tone resolute. Michael couldn't help but smile at his wife's unwavering support. "Well, first, I think we need to see if the homeowners association can do anything about the graffiti," he explained. "And then, I'm going to follow up with the police to make sure they're taking this seriously." Sarah nodded, her own expression hardening with a sense of purpose. "And if they don't?" she asked, her voice laced with a hint of defiance. Michael took a deep breath, his mind already racing with a plan of action. "Then we'll take matters into our own hands," he replied, his eyes narrowing with determination. "No one is going to get away with disrespecting my service and our country. Not on my watch." With a newfound resolve, Michael and Sarah set to work, prepared to do whatever it took to ensure that justice was served and the perpetrators were held accountable for their actions. The road ahead might be uncertain, but they were ready to face it head-on, united in their determination to defend the principles they held dear. The following morning, Michael woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. After a restless night of tossing and turning, he had made the decision to take a more proactive approach in addressing the vandalism to his truck. He began his day by calling the homeowners association, hoping that they might be able to provide some assistance or at least offer insights into how to handle the situation. However, his optimism quickly faded as the representative on the other end of the line informed him that there was little they could do, as the incident had occurred in a public parking lot outside of their jurisdiction. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson, but this is really a matter for the police to handle," the representative said, her tone apologetic. "Unless the vandalism occurred on our private property, we're not able to get involved." Frustrated, Michael thanked the representative and hung up the phone, his brow furrowed with concern. With the homeowners association unable to assist, he knew that his only recourse was to continue to work with the local authorities to bring the perpetrators to justice. Determined to follow up on the incident, Michael made his way to the police station, determined to ensure that his case was not forgotten. As he approached the front desk, he was greeted by a young officer, his expression neutral. "How can I help you, sir?" the officer asked, his tone professional. "I'm here to follow up on a vandalism report I filed yesterday," Michael replied, his voice steady but laced with a hint of urgency. "My truck was targeted, and I want to make sure the investigation is ongoing." The officer nodded and began typing on his computer, his fingers moving swiftly across the keyboard. After a few moments, he looked up, his expression slightly apologetic. "I'm afraid I don't have any new information to share with you, Mr. Thompson," the officer said. "The investigation is still in its early stages, and we haven't been able to identify any suspects yet." Michael's heart sank, and he felt a surge of frustration bubbling up within him. "But it's been a day already," he protested, his voice rising slightly. "Surely there must be something you can do to speed up the process." The officer raised a hand, his expression calming. "I understand your concern, sir, but these things take time," he explained. "We're doing everything we can to gather evidence and follow up on any leads, but it's a complex case." Sensing Michael's growing agitation, the officer continued, "Tell you what, why don't you leave me your contact information, and I'll make sure to keep you updated on any developments. In the meantime, try not to worry too much. We'll get to the bottom of this." Michael nodded reluctantly, his mind racing with 1,000 different thoughts. He couldn't shake the feeling that the authorities weren't taking the matter as seriously as he had hoped. After all, this wasn't just some random act of vandalism. It was a direct attack on his service and his identity as a veteran. As he left the police station, Michael felt a familiar sense of frustration welling up inside him. He had always been a man of action, someone who believed in taking matters into his own hands when necessary. But this time, he was forced to rely on the slow-moving bureaucracy of the justice system, and it was eating away at his patience. Determined to take a more proactive approach, Michael decided to turn to social media, hoping to rally public support for his cause. He knew that the power of the people could be a powerful tool in the fight for justice, and he was willing to use it to his advantage. Sitting down at his computer, Michael began crafting a post, his fingers moving furiously across the keyboard as he poured out his heart and soul. He shared the details of the vandalism, describing the offensive graffiti that had been scrawled across the symbols of his service. He spoke of his pride in his military career and the deep sense of violation he felt at having those symbols desecrated. As he hit the post button, Michael felt a sense of relief wash over him. He had taken the first step in his quest for justice, and now he could only hope that the outrage of his fellow citizens would be enough to spur the authorities into action. With a deep breath, Michael closed his laptop and headed out to the garage, determined to begin the painstaking process of removing the graffiti from his beloved truck. The road ahead might be long and arduous, but he was ready to face it head-on, fueled by a burning desire for justice and a newfound sense of purpose. As Michael sat at his computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard, he couldn't help but feel a surge of determination coursing through his veins. His social media post detailing the vandalism to his beloved truck had gone live just a few hours earlier, and the response had been nothing short of overwhelming. Within minutes, the post had started to gain traction, with friends, family, and even complete strangers sharing it across their own networks. The comments section had quickly become flooded with messages of outrage, support, and a collective call for justice. "How dare they target a veteran like this?" one commenter wrote. "This is a disgrace and an insult to all who have served our country." "I hope the police find these lowlifes and throw the book at them," another chimed in. "Michael, we're with you all the way." As Michael read through the flood of comments, he felt a sense of pride and validation wash over him. It was clear that his fellow citizens were just as appalled by the act of vandalism as he was, and they were ready to band together to ensure that the perpetrators were held accountable. Buoyed by the outpouring of support, Michael began to strategize his next move. He knew that the authorities were still investigating the incident, but he also understood that sometimes a little public pressure could go a long way in expediting the process. Reaching for his phone, Michael began to reach out to local media outlets, pitching them the story of a proud veteran whose vehicle had been targeted by a group of vandals. He knew that the more attention the incident received, the more likely it would be that the police would feel compelled to act quickly and decisively. To his surprise, the response from the media was overwhelmingly positive. Within a matter of hours, Michael had scheduled interviews with several local news stations, all eager to cover the story and shed light on the disrespect shown to a member of the military community. As the cameras rolled and the microphones were thrust in his face, Michael found himself speaking passionately about the sacrifices he had made in service to his country and the deep sense of violation he felt at having those sacrifices desecrated. "This isn't just about my truck," he said, his voice steady and resolute. "It's about the disrespect shown to all of the men and women who have worn the uniform and put their lives on the line to protect the freedoms we all enjoy." The interviews quickly gained traction, with the story being picked up by local and national news outlets alike. Suddenly, Michael's quest for justice had become a focal point of the national conversation, with people from all walks of life voicing their outrage and calling for swift action. As the days passed, Michael continued to monitor the progress of the police investigation, anxiously awaiting any updates. And then, just when he had begun to lose hope, a breakthrough occurred. One of the young adults who had been spotted in the parking lot during the incident had turned himself in, confessing to the vandalism and implicating his friends as accomplices. The news sent shockwaves through the community, and Michael felt a sense of relief and vindication wash over him. "I'm glad that at least one of them had the courage to come forward and take responsibility for their actions," Michael said, his voice tinged with a hint of satisfaction. "But I won't be satisfied until all of them are held accountable for this despicable act." With the investigation now in full swing, Michael knew that the road to justice was still long and arduous. But with the unwavering support of his fellow citizens and the determination of the authorities, he was more convinced than ever that the perpetrators would ultimately be brought to justice. As he looked out over his freshly repaired truck, the military decals once again proudly displayed, Michael couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of pride and purpose. This was a battle he was determined to win, not just for himself, but for all of the men and women who had sacrificed so much in service to their country. As the media attention surrounding Michael's case continued to grow, the pressure on the local authorities to find and apprehend the culprits intensified. The public outrage was palpable, and there was a widespread consensus that the vandals needed to be held accountable for their actions. Just when it seemed like the investigation had hit a dead end, a breakthrough occurred that would ultimately set the wheels of justice in motion. One of the young adults who had been spotted in the parking lot on the day of the incident, a member of a self-proclaimed elite social group, had been unable to live with the guilt of his involvement. Consumed by a heavy conscience and the fear of the consequences, he made the decision to turn himself in to the authorities. The young man, whose name was Tyler, arrived at the police station with his parents in tow, his face a mask of remorse and trepidation. As the officers listened to his confession, the details of the vandalism began to unfold, painting a disturbing picture of the underlying motivations behind the attack. According to Tyler, the group of friends had been targeting veterans and military personnel in the area for months, viewing them as easy targets for their brand of harmless pranks. They believed that their social status and perceived privilege entitled them to act with impunity, immune to the consequences of their actions. "We thought it would be funny to mess with the old guy's truck," Tyler admitted, his voice trembling. "We never imagined it would blow up like this. I just couldn't live with the guilt anymore." As the officers processed Tyler's confession, they quickly realized that this was not an isolated incident. The investigation soon uncovered a pattern of similar attacks targeting veterans and active duty service members, all carried out by the same group of young adults. The news sent shockwaves through the community, with many expressing outrage at the blatant disrespect and disregard for those who had risked their lives to protect their freedoms. Michael, in particular, felt a deep sense of vindication, knowing that his case had shone a light on a broader issue that had been simmering beneath the surface. "These individuals clearly have no respect for the sacrifices made by our men and women in uniform," Michael said, his voice laced with a mixture of anger and determination. "They need to be held accountable for their actions, and I won't rest until they are." With the confession in hand, the police quickly moved to apprehend the remaining members of the group, executing search warrants and gathering the necessary evidence to build a solid case against them. As the news of the arrest spread, the community rallied around Michael, offering their unwavering support and words of encouragement. "I'm glad to see that the authorities are taking this seriously," one local resident commented on social media. "These entitled brats need to learn that their actions have consequences, especially when they target our veterans." Another added, "Michael, you're a true hero, and we're all behind you. Keep up the fight, and don't let these punks get away with this." Buoyed by the outpouring of support, Michael felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that the road ahead would not be an easy one, as the legal system would undoubtedly present its own set of challenges. But with the weight of the community behind him, he was more determined than ever to see the case through to the end. As he prepared to testify in the upcoming trial, Michael couldn't help but reflect on the journey he had been on. What had started as a simple act of vandalism had evolved into a battle for the very soul of his community, a fight to defend the honor and dignity of those who had served their country with unwavering commitment. With a deep breath, Michael steeled himself for the challenges that lay ahead, determined to ensure that justice would be served and that the perpetrators of this heinous act would be held accountable for their actions, no matter the cost. As the investigation into the vandalism of Michael's truck continued to unfold, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. The police discovered that the group of young adults responsible for the attack on Michael's vehicle were part of a larger network of individuals who had been targeting veterans and active-duty military personnel across the city. The group, which called themselves the Elites, had a history of engaging in various acts of vandalism and harassment, fueled by a twisted sense of entitlement and a disregard for the sacrifices made by those who had served their country. According to the evidence gathered by the authorities, the Elites would often seek out vehicles displaying military decals or other visible signs of the owner's service, viewing them as easy targets for their so-called pranks. The group would then proceed to deface the vehicles with offensive graffiti, sometimes even going so far as to physically damage the property. "It's absolutely sickening," Michael said, his brow furrowed with anger. "These individuals have no respect for the men and women who risk their lives to protect our freedoms. They think they can just target us with impunity, and that's not something I'm going to stand for." As the details of the group's activities came to light, the public outrage only continued to grow. Veterans organizations, military support groups, and concerned citizens from all walks of life rallied behind Michael, pledging their support and demanding that the Elites be held accountable for their actions. "These aren't just isolated incidents," one local veteran stated during a televised interview. "This is a targeted campaign of harassment and intimidation against those who have served our country. It's a disgrace, and it needs to stop." The authorities, now armed with a wealth of evidence and the backing of the community, moved swiftly to apprehend the remaining members of the Elites. One by one, the young adults were taken into custody, their arrogant expressions quickly replaced by expressions of fear and trepidation as the reality of their situation sank in. During the interrogations, the Elites attempted to downplay their actions, claiming that their vandalism was nothing more than harmless pranks. They'd argued that they had no malicious intent, and that they were simply trying to have a bit of fun at the expense of those they viewed as easy targets. However, the overwhelming evidence, coupled with the public outcry, made it clear that their excuses would not be accepted. The authorities were determined to ensure that the Elites were held accountable for their crimes, and that the message was sent loud and clear that such blatant disrespect for veterans and military personnel would not be tolerated. As the case against the Elites began to build, Michael found himself at the center of a national spotlight. His story had resonated with people across the country, and he found himself receiving messages of support and encouragement from veterans and civilians alike. "You're a true hero, Michael," one supporter wrote. "You're standing up for all of us who have served, and we're with you every step of the way." Another commented, "This isn't just about your truck. This is about the dignity and respect that our veterans deserve. Keep fighting, and know that we got your back." Buoyed by the outpouring of support, Michael knew that he had a responsibility to see this fight through to the end. The Elites had not only attacked his personal property, but they had also struck a blow against the very values and principles that he had sworn to defend during his time in the Marine Corps. With a renewed sense of purpose, Michael prepared to take the stand, determined to ensure that justice was served and that the Elites were held accountable for their actions. The road ahead might be long and arduous, but he was more ready than ever to face the challenge head-on. As the trial against the Elites began to unfold, the courtroom was filled with a palpable sense of tension and anticipation. Michael, sitting in the front row, couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions as he prepared to take the stand and recount the events that had led him to this moment. The elites, sporting expensive designer suits and an air of arrogance, attempted to downplay their actions, arguing that the vandalism was nothing more than a harmless prank that had gotten out of hand. They claimed that they had never intended to cause any real harm, and that the outrage surrounding the incident had been blown out of proportion. "We're just a group of friends who were trying to have a bit of fun," one of the defendants, a young woman named Olivia, testified. "We never thought it would turn into such a big deal." However, the overwhelming evidence presented by the prosecution quickly shattered the elites' attempts at minimizing their culpability. The police had compiled a detailed record of the group's past activities, including a series of similar attacks on other veterans and military personnel in the area. Michael's testimony, delivered with a combination of poise and raw emotion, further underscored the gravity of the situation. He spoke eloquently about the sacrifices he had made during his time in the Marine Corps, and the deep sense of violation he had felt when his vehicle had been targeted. "This wasn't just an attack on my property," Michael said, his voice unwavering. "It was an attack on the very values and principles that I and countless others have sworn to defend. These individuals have shown a blatant disrespect for the service and sacrifice of our nation's veterans, and they need to be held accountable." As the trial progressed, the elites' attempts to justify their actions continued to unravel. Witness after witness took the stand, recounting their own experiences with the group's harassment and vandalism. The community's outrage, which had been simmering since the initial incident, now boiled over into a righteous fury that filled the courtroom. "These kids need to learn that their actions have consequences," one veteran, a decorated war hero, testified. "They can't just target us and expect to get away with it. We fought for this country, and we won't let them disrespect our service." The judge, a no-nonsense veteran himself, listened intently to the testimony, his brow furrowing with a growing sense of disgust. As the case drew to a close, he made it clear that the elites' actions were unacceptable and would not be tolerated. In a surprise move, the judge handed down a unique sentence that was intended to serve as a lesson to the defendants and a message to the broader community. In addition to ordering the elites to pay restitution for the damage to Michael's truck, he also sentenced them to community service at a local veterans organization. "You think you can just target those who have served our country with impunity?" the judge thundered, his voice echoing through the courtroom. "Well, now you're going to learn what it means to truly respect and appreciate the sacrifices of our veterans." As the elites were led away in handcuffs, Michael couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication wash over him. The journey had been long and arduous, but he knew that justice had been served. The message had been sent, not just to the elites, but to anyone who dared to disrespect the men and women who had fought to protect the freedoms they enjoyed. As he left the courthouse, Michael felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that the fight was far from over, that there were still many battles to be fought, but he was ready to face them head-on. The experience had only strengthened his resolve, and he was more determined than ever to ensure that the sacrifices of our nation's veterans would never be forgotten. The trial of the elites quickly became the talk of the town, with the details of the case capturing the attention of the entire community and beyond. As the young defendants were led into the courtroom, a hush fell over the spectators, all eyes fixed on the individuals who had dared to target a veteran and the symbols of his service. From the outset, it was clear that the elites were not prepared for the level of scrutiny and public pressure they were about to face. Their attempts to downplay their actions and present themselves as mere pranksters were met with fierce opposition from the prosecution, who methodically dismantled their arguments one by one. The testimony of Michael and the other victims was particularly impactful, as they recounted the deep sense of violation and disrespect they had experienced at the hands of the elites. The jurors, many of whom were themselves veterans or had family members who had served, listened with a growing sense of outrage as the details of the vandalism and the broader pattern of harassment were revealed. "These aren't just mindless acts of vandalism," one of the prosecutors argued passionately. "This is a calculated campaign of intimidation and disrespect against those who have sacrificed so much for our country. The elites need to be held accountable, not just for the damage they caused, but for the message they've sent to our entire community." As the trial progressed, the elites' attempts to mount a defense became increasingly desperate. They tried to paint themselves as the victims, claiming that they had been unfairly targeted and that the media coverage had blown the incident out of proportion. However, the overwhelming evidence presented by the prosecution, coupled with the unwavering support of the community, made it clear that their arguments were nothing more than hollow excuses. They think they can just hide behind their money and their privilege, another veteran in the audience muttered angrily. But they're about to learn that there's a price to pay for disrespecting those who have served. As the closing arguments were delivered, the tension in the courtroom reached a fever pitch. The Elite's lawyers made a last-ditch effort to sway the jury, painting their clients as misguided youth who had made a mistake but didn't deserve the harsh punishment being sought. But the jury, having listened to the heart-wrenching testimony and the compelling arguments of the prosecution, was having none of it. After deliberating for just a few hours, they returned with a unanimous verdict, finding the Elites guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in a thunderous roar of applause and cheers, as Michael and the other victims embraced one another, their faces etched with a mix of relief and satisfaction. "Justice has been served," Michael declared, his voice ringing with a newfound sense of pride. These individuals may have thought they could get away with their actions, but they underestimated the strength and resilience of our community. As the Elites were led away in handcuffs, their expressions a mix of shock and disbelief, Michael couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. The road to this moment had been long and arduous, but he knew that the fight was far from over. With the trial now behind him, Michael turned his attention to the next phase of his quest for justice, ensuring that the Elites were held accountable for their actions and that the message they had sent to the veteran community was thoroughly addressed. "This isn't just about my truck," he said, his eyes burning with determination. "It's about the dignity and respect that all of our veterans deserve. And I'm not going to rest until we've made sure that message is heard loud and clear." As he left the courthouse, Michael couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. The experience had strengthened his resolve, and he was more committed than ever to being a voice for those who had served their country with honor and distinction. As the dust settled on the trial of the Elites, the community eagerly awaited the sentencing hearing, where the fate of the young defendants would be determined. Michael, having played a central role in the case, knew that this was a pivotal moment, not just for him, but for the entire veteran community. When the date arrived, the courtroom was once again filled to capacity, with supporters of both sides jockeying for position. The Elites, their expressions a mix of trepidation and defiance, sat alongside their attorneys, desperately clinging to the hope that they would be shown leniency. However, the judge, a no-nonsense veteran himself, made it clear from the outset that he had little patience for the Elites' attempts to downplay their actions. As he delivered his sentencing remarks, his words were sharp and uncompromising. "These individuals have shown a blatant disrespect for the service and sacrifice of our nation's veterans," the judge declared, his voice booming through the room. "Their actions were not mere pranks, but a calculated campaign of intimidation and harassment that has no place in our community." The Elites squirmed uncomfortably in their seats as the judge continued, outlining the specifics of their punishment. In a surprising move, the judge ordered the young defendants to not only pay restitution for the damage to Michael's truck, but to also serve a significant number of community service hours at a local veterans organization. "You think you can just target our veterans and get away with it?" the judge said, his eyes narrowing. "Well, now you're going to learn what it means to truly respect and appreciate the sacrifices of those who have served this country." The courtroom erupted in a mix of cheers and murmurs as the community recognized the significance of the judge's decision. By sentencing the Elites to work directly with veterans, he was not only punishing them for their crimes, but also trying to educate them and foster a deeper understanding of the sacrifices made by those who had worn the uniform. As the Elites were led away to begin their court-ordered community service, Michael couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. The journey had been long and arduous, but he knew that justice had been served, and that the message had been sent loud and clear. "This isn't just about me anymore," Michael said, addressing the gathered reporters. "This is about standing up for all of our veterans, and making sure that their sacrifices are never forgotten or disrespected." In the weeks and months that followed, Michael closely monitored the Elites' progress as they carried out their community service, taking great satisfaction in the fact that they were being forced to confront the very people they had targeted and learn firsthand about the importance of respecting and honoring those who have served. It's not enough for them to just pay a fine or serve a few months in jail, Michael explained. They need to understand the gravity of their actions and the impact they've had on our community. And by working directly with veterans, they'll have the opportunity to do just that. As the elites begrudgingly fulfilled their court-ordered duties, the community continued to rally behind Michael, offering their unwavering support and encouragement. The story had become a symbol of the resilience and determination of the veteran community, and Michael found himself in high demand as a speaker and advocate. Michael is a true hero, one local veteran remarked. He's not just fighting for himself, but for all of us who have worn the uniform. And he's not going to stop until he's made sure that justice has been served and the message has been heard loud and clear. With a renewed sense of purpose, Michael continued to navigate the complex legal landscape, determined to ensure that the elites were held fully accountable for their actions. The road ahead might be long and arduous, but he knew that he had the support of his community behind him, and that was all the motivation he needed to keep pushing forward. As the elites diligently carried out their court-ordered community service, Michael watched with a mix of satisfaction and cautious optimism. He knew that the road to true redemption and understanding would be a long and arduous one, but he was determined to see the process through to the end. Day after day, the young defendants could be seen interacting with veterans at the local support center, their initial expressions of defiance and resentment slowly giving way to a growing sense of humility and appreciation. Michael made it a point to visit the center periodically, observing the interactions and engaging the elites in conversation, hoping to impart upon them the true significance of the sacrifices made by those who had worn the uniform. "I want them to understand that this isn't just about my truck," Michael said, his voice tinged with a hint of weariness. "It's about the dignity and respect that all of our veterans deserve, and the price that so many have paid to protect the freedoms we all enjoy." As the elites worked alongside the veterans, helping to organize events, provide assistance, and offer companionship, their attitudes began to shift. The arrogance and entitlement that had once defined them slowly gave way to a newfound sense of humility and respect. "It's been an eye-opening experience," one of the elites, a young woman named Sophia, admitted during a conversation with Michael. "I never truly understood the sacrifices these men and women have made, or the importance of the work they do. This has really made me reevaluate my priorities and my sense of self-importance." Michael nodded, his expression softening as he listened to her words. He knew that the road to redemption was a long and winding one, but he was encouraged to see the elites making tangible progress in their understanding and appreciation of the veteran community. As the months passed, the elites continued to fulfill their community service obligations, and Michael began to notice a shift not just in their attitudes, but in the broader community as well. The story of the vandalism and the subsequent trial had become a rallying cry for veterans and their supporters, inspiring others to take a stand against the disrespect and disregard that so many had faced. "Michael's story has really resonated with people," one local resident remarked. "It's not just about the damage to his truck, it's about the dignity and honor of all who have served. And I think the community has really rallied around that message." Indeed, as Michael looked around at the changes taking place, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. The journey had been long and arduous, but he knew that the fight was far from over. There were still battles to be fought, and more work to be done to ensure that the sacrifices of our nation's veterans were never forgotten or disrespected. But for now, as he gazed out at the freshly repaired truck, the military decals proudly displayed, Michael felt a sense of closure and vindication. The perpetrators had been held accountable, and the message had been sent that the veteran community would not be silenced, and that they would always stand up to defend the honor and dignity of those who had served. With a deep breath, Michael turned his attention to the future, determined to continue his work as an advocate and a voice for those who had worn the uniform. The road ahead might be long and uncertain, but he knew that he had the unwavering support of his community behind him, and that was all the motivation he needed to keep pushing forward. As the sun began to set, Michael climbed into his truck, the familiar rumble of the engine a comforting reminder of the journey he had been on. With a smile on his face, he headed home, his heart filled with a renewed sense of purpose and a deep appreciation for the sacrifices that had made his freedom possible.